The Navy SEAL training compound was buzzing that afternoon, the air thick with the smell of oil, dust, and gunpowder. A row of trainees stood behind the firing line, each holding their rifles with practiced precision. Beyond them stretched the range, layered targets, some fixed, others swinging gently on motorized tracks, and one nearly invisible challenge, a steel plate set at an impossible distance, so far away it shimmered like a mirage under the sun. Most of the recruits didn't even glance at it. They knew the plate was more a legend than a target, something instructors pointed out just to remind them that there were limits even for the best. The only people who had ever hit it were snipers with years of experience and optics worth more than a soldier's yearly pay. And even then it took more luck than skill. Lieutenant Marcus Hale, one of the SEAL officers overseeing the exercise, folded his arms across his chest and smirked at the group. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, his face weathered by deployments in deserts and jungles. "No one can hit that," he said, jerking his chin toward the glinting steel plate on the far horizon. "Not with the rifles you're holding. Hell, most of you couldn't hit it with a scope even if I gave you a week. So don't waste your time thinking about it. Focus on what's in front of you." The trainees laughed nervously, some nodding, others adjusting their grips, relieved they weren't expected to try. Hale's reputation was sharp enough to cut steel. He wasn't just an instructor but a combat-tested sniper who had taken shots in situations none of these young men could imagine. When he scoffed, it wasn't arrogance, it was experience speaking. To them his word was law. At the edge of the group, unnoticed at first, stood a woman who didn't fit in with the camouflaged crowd. Her clothes were plain, jeans faded from wear, a loose shirt, boots scuffed at the toe. Her hair was tied back in a practical knot, no makeup, no jewelry, nothing that suggested she belonged at a military compound. She wasn't part of the trainees nor one of the officers. She had been helping earlier in the day, carrying boxes of supplies, her quiet presence almost ghost-like as she moved about. Some of the men whispered she was just a local volunteer, maybe related to one of the staff. A simple woman, someone said, and the label stuck in their minds. But she had been listening. Her eyes, calm and unwavering, had locked on that distant plate when Hale dismissed it as impossible. She tilted her head slightly, the way a hunter might study the wind through tall grass. When the officer's voice faded and the group turned back to their drills, she stepped forward, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. "May I try?" she asked. The line of recruits froze. A ripple of disbelief spread through them like static. Hale turned slowly, his smirk deepening into something almost amused. "You?" His eyes scanned her up and down, taking in the worn clothes, the calloused hands, the unshaken calm. He almost laughed. "Lady, that target out there isn't for show and tell. That's over a mile away. Even my best men here can't land a hit on it. And you," he gestured vaguely, "you're not even in uniform. You wouldn't understand the math behind it, the windage, the drop. Hell, the bullet would go to sleep before it got halfway there." The men chuckled, some covering their grins, others openly laughing. It was ridiculous, the idea of this outsider, this simple woman, stepping into their world of precision and elite skill. She should have looked embarrassed, should have backed down. But instead, she gave a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Still," she said quietly, "may I try?" The air shifted. Hale squinted at her, the laughter behind him fading as the recruits realized she wasn't joking. He should have shut her down, should have told her to leave, but something about her tone, steady, measured, dug into him like a splinter. Against his better judgment, he waved his hand toward the bench where rifles lay waiting. "Fine," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Take your shot. Let's see how simple you are." The recruits shuffled to make space, their eyes locked on her as she stepped forward. She didn't rush. She didn't fumble. She picked up one of the standard-issue rifles, feeling the weight of it, testing the balance with a familiarity that made a few of the sharper-eyed men pause. She dropped to one knee, then stretched flat against the ground in a textbook-prone position that none of them expected her to know. Without asking for help, she adjusted the stock against her shoulder, her cheek finding the rest with ease. Hale's smirk faltered for the first time. The woman's gaze narrowed down the sights. She didn't squint, didn't hesitate. Instead, she closed her eyes briefly, inhaled deeply, and then exhaled, her body settling into stillness. Around her, whispers rippled again, but they sounded distant. The world shrank to the line of the barrel, the pull of gravity, the invisible currents of wind that danced across the range. Her fingers adjusted the rifle's position with subtle precision, small corrections that spoke of experience, not guesswork. Time stretched. The men behind her waited for a clumsy mistake, a fumbled trigger pull, a shot that went wide by half a field. Hale folded his arms tighter, telling himself she was only putting on a show. Then she squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle echoed across the compound, sharp and clean. The bullet cut through the distance, arcing through heat and wind. The recruits squinted, trying to follow its invisible path. A second passed. Then, a faint metallic ping drifted back from the horizon. The steel plate shuddered, a tiny spark of dust kicking from its edge. For a moment, no one breathed. The woman exhaled slowly, rolled her shoulders, and laid the rifle gently back on the bench. She stood, brushed the gravel dust from her palms and looked at Hale. Her eyes were calm, but the faintest flicker of challenge glimmered within them. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the impossible just needs a steady hand." The silence broke into chaos. The recruits shouted, some swearing, others laughing in disbelief, their voices overlapping in a storm of astonishment. Hale's mouth tightened, his pride stung as if the bullet had struck him instead of the plate. He tried to tell himself it was luck, a miracle shot, but deep down he knew what he had seen. That wasn't chance. That was skill. And for the first time in years, Lieutenant Marcus Hale, the sniper who believed he had seen everything, realized he might have underestimated the wrong person. The range had never been so loud, not with gunfire but with voices. The recruits crowded around, some craning their necks to look again at the distant plate as if it might somehow show proof that it had been struck. A few ran toward the spotting scope, jostling for position to confirm the mark. And there it was, a clean dent, sharp-edged, dead center on the steel. Not near the edge, not a lucky graze. A true hit. Hale felt his chest tighten. He wasn't used to losing control of a room, but in that moment he had. His men weren't looking at him anymore, they were looking at her. Their eyes carried something dangerous, admiration. For years, his word had been iron, his skill unmatched, his authority absolute. Now, in less than a minute, a woman who didn't even wear a uniform had shifted the balance. He stepped forward, raising his voice to cut through the noise. "Settle down." The command cracked like a whip, and the recruits froze, their postures snapping back to military stiffness. He fixed his gaze on the woman, who stood quietly at the bench, her expression unchanged. "One shot," he said, his tone sharp. "That's all it was. A fluke. Anyone can get lucky once." She tilted her head slightly, the corner of her mouth lifting in the faintest suggestion of a smile. "Then perhaps I should try again." The recruits gasped, whispers hissing between them like sparks catching in dry grass. Hale felt his pride burning hotter with every second. He should have ended it there, dismissed her, forced her off the line. But his pride was also a chain around his neck, dragging him into a challenge he couldn't walk away from. "Fine," he snapped. "Again. But this time you'll take 3 shots. No excuses, no lucky miracles. If you miss even one, everyone here will know it was nothing but chance." She gave a calm nod, unshaken. Without hesitation, she lowered herself back into position, her movements fluid, economical, the way only long years of practice could teach. The recruits leaned forward, breath caught in their throats. Hale folded his arms, forcing himself to remain stoic, but his eyes never left her. The first shot cracked. Another ping answered from the plate, louder this time, undeniable. A murmur surged through the men, quickly cut off by Hale's glare. The second shot came. Again, the ringing echo of steel drifted back over the range. This time, some of the recruits couldn't help themselves. Fists clenched, a cheer half suppressed as discipline battled with awe. Hale's jaw clenched. 2 shots, 2 clean hits. If the third landed, there would be no denying her skill. His authority would crumble in front of every man watching. He told himself she would miss, that the odds demanded it, that even the best shooters faltered. He needed her to miss. But the woman was stone. Her breathing steady, her body fused with the rifle, her focus unshaken. The third shot thundered, and a heartbeat later, the plate sang again. The silence that followed was not the silence of disbelief this time. It was the silence of revelation. Every man there knew what it meant. 3 shots, 3 hits. No luck, no fluke. It was mastery. The recruits erupted. Some shouted, others laughed, some slapped each other's shoulders in raw excitement. It was as if they had witnessed history. In their minds they had. Hale stood rigid, his face hard, but inside a storm raged. He felt humiliated, challenged, stripped of the pedestal he had stood on for years. Worse still, he saw something in his men's eyes that he had never seen directed at him. True respect. They weren't just impressed. They believed. He had to take control back. "Enough," he barked, his voice louder than before, but even then it didn't cut as cleanly through their voices. He stepped toward her, looming, his presence heavy with authority. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Where did you learn to shoot like that? You don't just pick up a rifle and hit steel a mile away. That's not something a simple volunteer just does." She stood, brushing the dust from her knees, her eyes meeting his without fear. "Does it matter?" she asked quietly. The question hit him harder than any bullet. It did matter. It mattered because his pride was bleeding, because his control was slipping, because every man under his command was watching him falter. He needed to reassert himself, to prove that she hadn't just outdone him in his own arena. "You think you've proven something?" Hale growled. "Fine. Let's see how you do when the conditions change." He gestured toward a different section of the range where moving targets swung unpredictably on motorized tracks. Some targets popped up for seconds before dropping again, simulating live combat. "Hit those. Rapid fire. 5 in a row. If you're as good as you think, you'll handle it." The recruits exchanged glances. They knew what Hale was doing, raising the stakes, trying to corner her into failure. None of them believed she could do it. The moving drills broke plenty of trained soldiers. The woman studied the new section of the range for a moment, then gave a small nod. She picked up the rifle again, checking the magazine, her movements calm, unhurried. She stepped into position. The first target popped. The shot rang instantly, the target dropping before the echo of the crack had faded. Gasps rippled. The second target appeared, gone in less than a breath. Third, fourth, fifth, each falling in perfect sequence, each shot timed with a precision that bordered on unnatural. When the fifth target clattered down, the range fell into stunned silence again. This time even Hale couldn't speak. The woman lowered the rifle, her hands steady, her face calm. She placed it gently back on the bench and looked at him once more. Her voice was soft, almost kind, but it cut sharper than any blade. "You said no one could hit it," she murmured. "And yet here we are." The recruits erupted again, louder than before. Some didn't even bother to hide their admiration now. To them she wasn't a mystery anymore. She was a legend being born right before their eyes. Hale turned away, his pride in tatters, his authority slipping like sand through his fingers. For the first time he wasn't sure what to do. But one thing was certain. This woman, whoever she was, had just changed everything. Night settled over the training compound like a heavy blanket, the desert air cooling sharply after the blistering sun. The recruits had long since been dismissed, but their voices still carried in hushed, excited murmurs through the barracks. The story of the day spread like wildfire. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, every man on base knew about the mysterious woman who had humbled Lieutenant Hale with 3 impossible shots and a flawless moving target run. They didn't call her the simple woman anymore. To them she was something else entirely, a ghost, a sharpshooter, a legend in plain clothes. Hale sat in his office, the glow of the desk lamp harsh against the shadows creeping in from the corners. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched on the reports scattered in front of him, though he hadn't read a word in hours. His pride still burned, each replay of the afternoon carving deeper wounds into his ego. It wasn't just that she hit the target. Anyone could get lucky once. But 3 times? Then the moving drills? That was no fluke. That was skill honed sharper than most men ever achieved in a lifetime. And she had made him look like a fool in front of his men. He reached for his coffee, the liquid long cold, and set it back down untouched. He couldn't let it go. He needed to know who she was. A civilian? A contractor? Some off-duty sniper playing games? No. He would have known. He prided himself on knowing everyone who mattered in this field. And yet, she'd appeared from nowhere, quiet, unassuming, like she belonged among shadows. The door creaked open and Sergeant Dempsey, one of his oldest comrades, stepped inside. "Sir," he said cautiously, standing at attention. Hale grunted, not looking up. Dempsey cleared his throat. "The men, they won't stop talking about her." "I know," Hale snapped, his voice cutting. "That's the problem." "She's got them inspired, sir," Dempsey said after a pause. "Motivated. Some of the recruits say it was the most incredible thing they've ever seen." Hale slammed his fist onto the desk, rattling the lamp. "Inspired? Motivated? They're supposed to be inspired by me. I've led men into fire, pulled them out alive, made shots in combat that textbooks don't even cover. And now some stranger waltzes in and they're calling her a legend." His voice shook with anger, but beneath it was something else, fear. Fear that the foundation he'd built his reputation on was crumbling. Dempsey hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. "Sir, what if she's not just some stranger? What if she's somebody important?" Hale finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Think about it, Dempsey pressed. That wasn't amateur shooting. That was something else. Maybe she's former military. Special forces. Maybe she trained somewhere we don't even know about. Hale's mind churned. The thought had gnawed at him since the shots rang out. He rose suddenly from his chair, pacing the room. Find out, he ordered. Everything. Who she is, where she came from, why she's here. If she sneezed in a diner 3 states away, I want it on my desk. Yes, sir. Dempsey saluted and left, the door closing softly behind him. Hale stood alone in the silence, staring at the wall but seeing only her face, calm, steady, unshaken by the weight of the rifle or the eyes of the men. He had seen battle-hardened soldiers crack under less pressure. Whoever she was, she had nerves of steel. Later that night, Hale left his office and walked the compound. The moon lit the gravel paths in silver, casting long shadows across the firing range. He found her there, alone, standing at the line with her hands resting lightly on one of the rifles. She wasn't shooting, just gazing into the distance where the impossible plate still glinted faintly under the moonlight. You shouldn't be here after hours, Hale said, his voice rough. She didn't turn. Neither should you. He bristled at the casualness of her tone. I need answers, he said firmly, stepping closer. You made a fool out of me today. You undermined my authority in front of my men. And I'm not going to let that stand without knowing who you are. At that, she finally looked at him. Her eyes, in the pale light, seemed older than her face, carrying a weight he couldn't place. And what will you do with those answers, Lieutenant? Challenge me again? Prove you're the better shot. Hale's jaw tightened. You're hiding something. No civilian shoots like that. Not without training most men never even dream of. She smiled faintly, but it wasn't amusement. It was something sad, almost distant. Maybe I trained. Maybe I didn't. Does it change the fact that your men saw what they saw? Her words stung because they were true. Even if he dug up her entire history, even if he found a reason that explained her skill, it wouldn't erase the sight of her outshooting him in front of every recruit. That image was carved into their minds, into his. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. Tell me who you are. She studied him for a long moment, then looked back at the horizon. Once, she said softly, I wore a uniform too. Not yours. Not this country's. But I carried a rifle and I learned what it means to never miss when it matters. To some, it was skill. To me, it was survival. Hale froze, her words rippling through him. She didn't elaborate, didn't name a place or a flag, but the weight of truth was in her voice. She wasn't just some drifter. She had lived through fire, maybe more fire than even he had known. Before he could press her further, she set the rifle back on the bench and stepped away. The men don't need to know my past, she said. They just need to know that sometimes the impossible isn't as far away as it looks. And with that, she walked past him, her footsteps soft against the gravel. Hale turned, watching her vanish into the shadows, frustration and curiosity warring inside him. He hated that she wouldn't give him the full story. But he hated more that part of him respected her for it. As the night deepened, one truth gnawed at him. He wasn't done with her. Not until he uncovered everything. Morning came with the crack of reveille, the compound springing to life in its usual rhythm of drills, inspections, and sweat. But beneath the routine, there was a different current, an undercurrent of whispers that had nothing to do with orders or training schedules. The recruits talked in corners, in hushed voices during chow on the benches by the barracks. They weren't whispering about Hale anymore. They were whispering about her. They replayed every detail from the day before. The way she lay prone without hesitation, how she breathed with the rifle as if it were part of her, how the shots had landed with surgical precision. Some swore she wasn't human. Others joked she must have been a ghost sniper, the spirit of some fallen soldier who wandered into their camp. But the most persistent theory was that she had been military herself. Maybe special forces, maybe something darker, off the books, the kind of thing no one admitted existed. Hale heard it all, and each rumor was salt in a wound he couldn't ignore. His men admired her. That much was clear. And admiration could be dangerous if it shifted loyalty away from him. He couldn't let that happen. In his office, Sergeant Dempsey entered carrying a thin stack of papers. He dropped them onto Hale's desk. We ran her name through what little we had, sir. Comes up blank. No employment history on file, no record of service in this country, no driver's license, not even a bank account. As far as the system's concerned, she doesn't exist. Hale's brows knitted. That's impossible. Everyone leaves a trace. Not her, Dempsey said grimly. If she had a past here, it's been scrubbed clean. Hale flipped through the empty results, frustration gnawing at him. So she's a ghost. Or someone who doesn't want to be found. That thought unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. If she could erase herself so completely, she wasn't just some prodigy with a rifle. She was trained and dangerous. And the fact that she walked onto his range as if it were nothing told him she was here for a reason. Later that day, Hale walked the compound, his eyes following her whenever she appeared. She moved with the same quiet efficiency as before, carrying supplies, helping with tasks no one else wanted. She never pushed herself forward, never demanded attention. But attention found her anyway. Recruits watched her when they thought no one noticed, their admiration growing with every passing hour. At lunch, two of the younger men whispered near Hale's table, unaware of his presence until his shadow loomed over them. "You really think she's one of us?" one asked, his voice low. "No way, she's just some civilian," the other replied. "No civilian shoots like that. You saw the way she handled the recoil, the way she adjusted for wind without even looking at the flags. That's years of training." Hale's glare cut their conversation short, the men scattering with guilty looks. But their words stuck in his mind. They weren't wrong. That evening he caught sight of her by the motor pool, helping a mechanic lift a crate of parts. She worked without complaint, without conversation, but Hale couldn't ignore the way her eyes scanned her surroundings, sharp and calculating. Not paranoid, not nervous, just aware. Always aware. Like a soldier who had spent years living in hostile ground. He approached, his boots crunching against the gravel. "You've got everyone talking," he said flatly. She set the crate down gently, wiped her hands on her jeans and looked at him. "And what are they saying?" "That you're not who you claim to be. That you're something more." Her lips curved into that faint, sad smile again. "People will always make stories out of things they don't understand." Hale stepped closer, lowering his voice. "They're not just stories. They're asking questions I should be asking. Who trained you? Where did you come from? What are you doing here?" She didn't flinch under his stare. Instead, she met his eyes calmly, her tone unshaken. "You think if you dig far enough, you'll find an answer that will restore your pride. But you won't. Because this isn't about me, Lieutenant. It's about you." The words cut deeper than he wanted to admit. His pride bristled, but his curiosity flared even stronger. "Then make it about me. Prove you're not just some ghost playing games on my range. Tell me who you are." She held his gaze for a long moment, then finally turned away, lifting another crate as if the conversation hadn't pierced her at all. "I am no one," she said softly. "And maybe that's why I frighten you." Hale stood there, the weight of her words pressing down on him. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not his men, not his superiors, not even enemies across the scope of his rifle. She didn't fear him. She didn't need to. That night, Hale and Dempsey pored over maps and files, trying to piece together scraps of rumors, cross-referencing conflicts overseas, names whispered in dark corners of intelligence reports. Nothing concrete surfaced, but patterns emerged. Stories of a woman sniper in distant battlefields, a phantom who turned tides with impossible shots, who disappeared as quickly as she appeared. Some called her a myth, others swore she was real. The next morning, when Hale returned to the range, he found the recruits already gathered, their rifles at the ready. But their eyes weren't on the targets. They were on her, standing quietly at the bench, waiting. She hadn't asked for the attention, but she had it all the same. Hale felt the shift in the air, the way loyalty tilted like a compass needle drawn to true north. For the first time in his career, he wasn't sure if he was the one leading. And that terrified him more than any enemy ever had. The morning sun burned down on the training field as the SEALs regrouped for what was supposed to be a private demonstration. Yet, word had spread across the base faster than wildfire. Soldiers, mechanics, and even a few civilian contractors gathered around the perimeter to watch the woman who had, against all odds, stunned the Navy's elite the day before. Some whispered about luck, others about trickery, but everyone wanted to see if she could do it again. Captain Reynolds stood in the center of the field, his arms crossed, his eyes hidden behind reflective aviator glasses. He hadn't said a word since yesterday's display, but his silence only amplified the tension. The officer who had mocked her, the one who declared, "No one can hit that," lingered near the edge, his expression still caught between disbelief and humiliation. The woman arrived quietly, carrying the same worn rifle slung across her shoulder. There was no dramatic entrance, no flourish. She walked with the calm of someone who didn't need approval. She wasn't here to prove anything to herself, only to show them what was already true. Her boots pressed into the dust, each step unhurried, and as she reached the center of the field, the murmurs stilled. "Set the target," Reynolds ordered. His voice was cold, clipped, but beneath the steel, there was something else, a note of curiosity he couldn't hide. This time the target wasn't stationary. A drone buzzed into the air, carrying a small painted disc beneath it. It zigzagged erratically, climbing and dipping, weaving like a drunken wasp. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. Even the SEALs, hardened professionals with years of marksmanship training, knew how absurd this was. The disc was no bigger than a dinner plate, dancing unpredictably against the blinding sky. The mocking officer smirked bitterly. "Let's see her pull this one off." The woman didn't react. She unslung the rifle, checked the chamber with a crisp motion, then raised it to her shoulder. The world seemed to narrow around her. To her there was no crowd, no officer waiting to gloat, no skepticism pressing in from all sides. There was only the rifle, her breath, and the darting blur against the sky. She waited. Not chasing the target with her sights, not rushing, just waiting. Seconds stretched into silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then, as the drone banked sharply, exposing the underside of the disc for the briefest heartbeat, she exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The crack split the air. A blink later, the disc shattered, fragments spiraling downward in a glittering cascade. The drone swerved violently, trying to compensate, but with no payload to carry, it spun out of balance before sputtering and crashing into the dust. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Even the SEALs, trained to remain stoic, couldn't contain their surprise. A few let out low whistles. Others exchanged looks that mixed respect with disbelief. But the woman wasn't finished. Before the sound of the first shot had fully faded, she adjusted, sighted again and fired twice more. The drone, already crippled, jerked left and right, only for both rounds to find their mark, ripping clean holes through its slender frame. It collapsed in a puff of smoke, lifeless wreckage hitting the ground with a metallic thud. Silence followed. Not the silence of dismissal, but the kind that hung heavy, charged, undeniable. Captain Reynolds removed his sunglasses slowly, revealing eyes sharp and unblinking. For the first time, he allowed himself to look at her not as a curiosity, not as an intruder, but as something far rarer. "Appear." The mocking officer stepped forward, his face flushed. "That's impossible," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. No one could have tracked that, no one. The woman lowered her rifle. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but it carried across the field with absolute clarity. "You keep saying no one can. Maybe that's why you'll never try hard enough to learn." Her words hit harder than the shot itself. It wasn't arrogance, it was truth stripped bare. For men who had built their lives on discipline, strength, and control, the idea that they had limited themselves with disbelief was more cutting than any insult. Reynolds finally spoke. Again. Another drone was released, this one faster, darting higher, spinning unpredictably. The woman didn't hesitate. 3 shots, 3 hits. The wreckage clattered across the dirt, undeniable proof. The spectators erupted, not in cheers but in a wave of murmurs, shaking heads and reluctant admiration. Some even looked ashamed for doubting. She had done what they swore was beyond reach. The mocking officer turned away, his jaw tight, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. But Reynolds watched the woman intently, as if measuring the weight of what he'd just seen. He stepped closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "Where did you learn that?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Not where." "Oh. I stopped listening to the voices that said it couldn't be done." Reynolds studied her, and for the first time, a flicker of something softened in his expression. Respect. Maybe even admiration. She slung the rifle back over her shoulder and walked away, leaving the wreckage of drones scattered across the training field. The crowd parted instinctively, eyes following her as though she carried something untouchable. In the dust behind her, the elite of the Navy stood humbled. They had mocked her, doubted her, even laughed at her. But in the space of a few moments she had done more than prove them wrong. She had shown them the limits they carried were not in their weapons, nor their training, but in their own belief. And that truth lingered heavier than the echo of any bullet. The training ground had grown quieter after the shock of Anna's repeated successes. What had begun as a spectacle, a joke at the expense of a simple woman, had transformed into something else entirely. The men who once smirked and exchanged mocking glances now stood in a semicircle, their eyes pinned on her with a mixture of disbelief, curiosity, and grudging admiration. But there was also tension, a tight coil of competitiveness that could not be dismissed. Anna stood calmly, her breathing steady, the weapon still resting easily in her hands. To her, the silence was almost soothing. She wasn't thinking about victory or pride, she was only doing what she knew. Her father's lessons rang in her memory: patience, focus, precision. The world outside blurred whenever she held a weapon. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about becoming one with the target, letting instinct guide her hand. The SEAL officer who had mocked her earlier clenched his jaw. The sting of humiliation burned in his chest. This was not how the day was supposed to go. He had expected laughter, maybe even cheers at her failure, a reinforcement of his own superiority. Instead, he was being dismantled, not by another soldier, not by a rival officer, but by someone who wasn't even supposed to be here, a woman who claimed no rank, no special training, no medals. He stepped forward, his boots heavy against the dirt. "Enough games," he said sharply, his voice echoing. "If you're truly as good as you look, let's push this to the limit. No tricks, no easy targets." He motioned toward the crew standing by with new equipment. "Set up the moving dummies. Multiple trajectories, randomized speeds." There was a murmur among the men. The moving dummy drill was notoriously difficult, designed to challenge even seasoned shooters. Targets zipped across wires at unpredictable angles, some darting left, others zigzagging, others popping up unexpectedly before vanishing. Few ever cleared the course cleanly. Anna gave a small nod, unbothered. "Set them up," she said simply. The mechanics hurried into motion. Within minutes, the field was alive with the whir of machinery. Figures jerked into view, sliding across lines, jerking up from pits, swinging from side to side. It looked chaotic, impossible even. The SEAL officer folded his arms, a thin smirk tugging at his lips. "Let's see you handle this then." Anna positioned herself at the line. She inhaled once, slow and steady, then exhaled. Her eyes tracked the motion of the first dummy, then the second, then the third. To most, it would look like madness, a blur of targets colliding into one another. But to Anna, patterns existed beneath the chaos. She could see the rhythm, the intervals of appearance and disappearance, the slight mechanical ticks that betrayed their timing. The whistle blew. She moved with astonishing fluidity, her shots precise, her body turning just enough to catch each new target. The first dummy dropped before it had fully crossed the wire. The second spun off its line, sparks flying. A third leapt up from a pit, and before the others had registered it, Anna's shot tore straight through its chest plate. The onlookers gasped. She didn't hesitate, didn't falter. Her eyes shifted faster than the targets themselves, each movement sharp and economical. By the time the course ended, all that remained was silence and the faint smell of gunpowder. Every single target lay disabled. The men erupted into noise. Some cursed in disbelief, others clapped instinctively, while a few shook their heads, refusing to accept what they had just seen. The SEAL officer's smirk vanished, his lips pressed tight in frustration. He had hoped, no expected, her to falter. Yet she had cleared the course flawlessly, something even he had never achieved. "Again," he demanded, though his voice cracked slightly under the weight of his own disbelief. Anna tilted her head, her eyes calm. "If you want." They reset the course. This time, the targets moved even faster, the programming adjusted for maximum difficulty. Some of the men whispered, others crossed their arms, eager to see her finally stumble. But when the whistle blew again, the same thing happened. Her body swayed and turned with the rhythm, her shots perfectly timed. One after another, the targets fell. Not one escaped her. By the end, there was no doubt left. This wasn't luck, this wasn't coincidence. It was skill of the highest order. When the last shot rang out, silence descended again, heavier than before. The SEAL officer stared at her, his pride shattered, his authority undermined in front of his men. "How?" one of the younger soldiers finally blurted. "How are you doing this? Nobody shoots like that." Anna lowered her weapon, her expression soft. "You see targets. I see patterns. I see time." She paused as if searching for words that would make sense. "My father taught me to listen, not with my ears but with my instincts. The world moves with rhythm. When you learn to feel it, everything slows down." The men exchanged glances, their skepticism battling with the evidence before their eyes. The officer, still unwilling to concede, barked, "Talking nonsense. This is just a trick." But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at him. Deep down he knew what he had witnessed was real. Anna glanced at him, her eyes calm but piercing. "You challenged me. I only answered. If you want to keep pushing, then push. But understand something." She stepped forward, her voice steady but firm. "Skill doesn't come from pride. It comes from humility. You think you've mastered everything. That is why you miss. I know I have not mastered everything. That is why I hit." The words cut deeper than the shots ever could. For the first time, the SEAL officer had no reply. He looked away, his jaw clenched, his pride bruised beyond repair. The men surrounding him stood straighter, some almost ashamed of the way they had laughed earlier. They were witnessing something rare, something that went beyond the boundaries of training or military discipline. Anna didn't linger. She placed the weapon gently on the table and turned to walk away, her movements unhurried, her shoulders relaxed. She had no need to prove anything further. She had already spoken louder with her actions than words ever could. Behind her, the silence stretched long. The men watched her leave, and though not all would admit it, respect had replaced their mockery. And for the SEAL officer, the sting of humiliation remained, but it was not just humiliation anymore. It was something more dangerous, an awakening. The silence that followed her words stretched long in the training hall. Every eye fixed on her, every breath held, every disbelief on the edge of crumbling.